Hey, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm very pleased to have with me as my guest Sid Fohrman, who's a partner at Paul Hastings and also chair of the music industry practice over there. Sid, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Now, Sid, I've interviewed a lot of lawyers. I don't think I've interviewed anyone who specializes in music. So that's why I wanted to invite you and maybe just start by asking you, how you decided to even get into the music industry practice to begin with.
Yeah, sure. I actually started out my career as a litigator, so my path here was certainly not a linear path.
Hmm.
I'm from outside of Chicago originally. I went to law school at Pepperdine, and then I actually didn't even take the California bar. I took the Illinois bar. I was always going home. I took a job as a litigator, and about 3 years into my career there, I realized that that wasn't really fulfilling me. And when I started to look, at the next 20 years, I realized that I really needed to find a way to merge, my passion for music and entertainment and sports with my profession. And so, fortunately for me, I had an incredibly supportive wife who agreed to get in the car, quit my big law job, get in the car, and drive across the country with our dog to California. And I took a job at a startup I think I was making $30,000 a year.
Wow.
So barely sort of scraping by, but it was the best decision I ever made. And I certainly wouldn't be here had I not, sort of done that.
Wow. Well, what kind of startup was it? I mean, was it in the music
It
industry?
was,
What kind of
yeah,
startup
sorry.
was it?
Yeah, it was a music and tech startup. I think it was before its time, which often happens. Timing is everything.
Yeah.
And it was called Unsigned Music Network. And it was something that I think could exist today, where ultimately it was a platform for independent unsigned artists to release their music and sell ringtones, if we remember ringtones. And this was the early days of digital music. And then it sort of imploded for a number of reasons that are not entirely relevant, but that was my start. That was my ability to put that on my resume. It got me into the mix and talking to people in the industry. And so, had I not sort of had the support of my wife and taken that shot, I certainly wouldn't be where I am today, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, interesting. Well, you mentioned it was one of your passions. Did you play music as a kid? Tell me a little about what your experience with music
Yeah.
exactly was.
So yes, I played music. I played the guitar. I always had a passion for music. I actually went to an all sports camp growing up, highly, highly competitive sports camp,
Uh-huh.
but it was really interesting because while we had a bunch of macho, you know, athletes and it was super, super competitive, there was this, arts program there. And we actually put on plays and musicals. And every year when the parents would come up to visit, it was an 8 week sleepover camp. We put on a full musical performance.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
so there wasn't this stigma, as there often is with, kids growing up and being in theater and can you do that and also be athletic? I didn't, that wasn't my reality, and sort of continued to foster this love for music.
Oh,
And I sang and have played the guitar for, quite a while
oh,
now.
oh. Do you
Still,
play in a band now or anything like that?
I don't, but I just learned that Paul Hastings, one of my new partners, is a really great musician and writes music. And then I just found out we have a female bass player, and one of our partners is apparently an excellent drummer. And so we're thinking about putting a band together. We got our firm retreat coming up, and
Oh, wow.
I think we're gonna try to put a band together and a set and play for our partners.
That's so cool. Well,
Yeah.
it sounds like your music career got off to, or music legal career got into an interesting start. Tell me a little bit how it's evolved then over the decades, because obviously you've done a lot since that internet startup, I'm guessing.
It's been quite a bit and quite a ride for sure. So my my first job was at Akin Gump, and I was fortunate to have two incredible mentors. And so I was at Big Law, and I walked into a practice that was representing Bob Dylan and Stevie Wonder and John Fogerty and the NFL around a lot of music initiatives and launch music, which was literally was, predates Pandora, but that was really the first internet radio. And so I was sort of thrown in immediately right into the mix
Hmm.
and became a real music industry lawyer
Hmm.
where I was doing the nuts and bolts deals of the music industry. I just happened to sit at a large firm. And so over time, my practice has evolved primarily as the market has evolved and the industry has evolved, where early days of downloads to streaming to all these new use cases that integrate music, that rely on music. And Peloton's probably the best example of that. I was Peloton's first lawyer. I think they had 13 or 14 employees at the time. I was the
Hmm.
first sort of outside counsel for them and navigated that world at a time when the recorded music industry wasn't as bullish on the possibilities of completely novel new use cases.
Hmm.
None of these labels had, digital music departments. Those didn't exist, and so that was a challenge for sure. And I spent about better part of 2 years of my life flying around the country, meeting with all, the labels and publishers, and really trying to explain to those stakeholders the possibility of something like a Peloton, which opens up a completely new use case and a new revenue stream. And so from there, I realized, being at the intersection of tech and music was really a space that I enjoyed and super innovative and complex. And as more and more technologies came out, my practice sort of evolved around that and Web3 and now AI. And then also by virtue of the fact that I've always sit, at a large law firm with, really strong corporate and finance and M&A, uh, you know, where the industry had really changed, we now see a brand new market. Well, it's probably about more like 5 years old at this point, with a lot of outside investment coming into music, a lot of music catalog acquisitions. And
Hmm.
so again, my ability to sort of capitalize on that market, being in the right place at the right time, being at a large law firm where we could support those larger transactions. And so now primarily my practice comprises of deals that are and representing clients that are at the intersection of tech and
Hmm.
media and music and then what we call, music M&A at this point.
I see. Interesting. So, do you still represent artists, traditional artists and labels as well, or just mainly the tech companies now?
So not so much on the artist side, although one of the reasons for joining Paul Hastings for me is I do want to do more representation. I've represented artists over the years, and I currently represent some artists. Most of my work historically has been on the company side, but that has been sort of agnostic in terms of quote like which side
Hmm.
of the deal.
Hmm.
And so I represent, a number of, global music and entertainment companies and record companies and music publishers, companies like, Primary Wave and BMG, who are super active in the acquisition space. But Paul Hastings has a talent practice and a really
Hmm.
reputable practice that's headed up by Eric Hyman. And so that was certainly one of the reasons why Paul Hastings was super attractive to me.
Interesting. Now, obviously, you do a ton of music. Do you actually do anything else? Or are you pretty much 100% exclusive music? Do you do any sports or just entertainment in general?
I do. I would say music's probably about 70% of what I do.
Okay.
And it's evolved over time, depending on the market and what's going on. That can change. But I have done and continue to do quite a bit of podcast work
Mm,
and general entertainment content, digital content and media. So I think the line of, demarcation for me is I'm a digital media lawyer, music lawyer. I don't do traditional film and television. We
mm,
have those capabilities here at
mm,
Paul Hastings, but I sit more on the new media side of the world.
yeah. Now, you've obviously had a super successful law firm career. I know you just joined Paul Hastings, but have you ever thought about maybe you do another startup like you did before or something like that, or join one of these companies that are doing a lot in that
Well,
space?
this is my unquestionably, this is my last law firm stop. I feel very much at home here. And, I don't know. I would never say never. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. And I serve on some advisory boards, which I think sort of scratches that itch a bit,
Uh-huh.
being creative and innovative. And the really nice thing about my practice for me is that because I do represent so many institutional clients, I do have the flexibility to take some shots on representing startups and emerging
Mm,
companies,
mm,
which I find incredibly rewarding. And so yeah, I've continued to do that. Whether or not I would jump to, an in-house role or rolling up my sleeves at a startup, never say never.
never say never. So, did your wife, is she glad? Did she say that she always knew it'd be successful when she came out with you in California, or did she have her
My
doubts?
my wife takes all the credit. I knew you before, that sort of thing. And she did. And yeah, Richard, how it goes. You got to have people that support you and believe in you. And I've been incredibly fortunate in my life and my career. I credit, my friend group that I've known since and have stayed very close with since I was a child and through college. And we've all kind of gone through this thing together in terms of navigating life. And that's been incredibly meaningful. And then my mentors, unquestionably, believing in me, giving me a shot. I think we all need that.
Yep.
So, but yes, to answer your question, my wife has been, and her name is Andrea. She's a jewelry designer and a creative, so she understood. She
The
gets me.
itch.
She knows that I
Yeah.
needed to
Yeah.
do something that really that I was passionate about, and that I felt like I was being productive and something that was super rewarding.
Yeah.
And she saw me as a litigator, and she realized that probably wasn't the best fit for me.
Well, it's super cool because very few people really get to integrate their passions and their hobbies with their career and their profession, right? Those are usually two separate things, and you're one of the lucky people that have been able to integrate the two. And so I'm sure you wake up every morning really excited to go to work.
I do. I actually do. When you tell people you're a lawyer, sometimes, there's this stigma around it or this, sort of assumption that you're not happy in what you're doing. I'm grateful. Absolutely. Is my
Yeah.
job challenging and difficult and stressful? Absolutely. Is every day roses? Absolutely not. But if I take a step back, uh, I absolutely do not take for granted where I was and where I've gotten to, and how fortunate I am to be working in an industry that I love so much and that is impacts the world in so many incredible ways.
Yeah. Well, Sid, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your taking the time to share your great story. Congratulations on all your
Thank you.
success. And if this podcast ever takes off, I'll definitely have you represent me.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Well, hopefully it takes off on this one.
Sounds good.
All
This is
right,
Richard
thanks,
Hsu
Richard.
and Sid Fohrman. Thanks so much. Bye.